For some local reaction to this escalating situation in the Middle East, I want to bring in Liberal Senator Dave Sharma, who is also a former ambassador to Israel. Dave Sharma, welcome.
Good afternoon, Patricia.
What's your reaction to this escalation?
Well, look, I'd say it's right to describe it as an escalation because Israel and Iran have been in a state of conflict now, open conflict for at least a few years, and a conflict that's been more in the shadows for several years prior to that. And this reflects the latest chapter in that. Let's not forget that just last year there were, two significant exchanges between Israel and Iran involving ballistic missiles, drones, aircraft and whatnot, and this is, a continuation of that story.
But it's a continuation, but it's not exactly the same as last year. It does seem like quite a dramatic escalation. Do Israel's unilateral strikes on Iran indicate the collapse of Donald Trump's efforts to convince Netanyahu to hold off?
I'm not sure they do. Look, we saw the president say that an Israeli strike might not be imminent, but it might well happen. We saw the CENTCOM commander, Joseph Kirillik, cancel his visit to Israel, which was scheduled to be taking place this weekend. We've seen the United States withdraw non-essential personnel from its embassy in Baghdad and military bases throughout the Gulf, and we've seen US forces on a high state of alert and readiness now for the past 2 months. So I don't think this attack or this escalation was a surprise to the United States.
No, but it was not supported by the United States, and that seems significant.
Well, it wasn't supported materially, no, in the sense that US personnel or military was not involved in the attack. But it's clear, when Donald Trump launched his diplomatic initiative to seek to negotiate with Iran, he said he would give it 2 months, and after that, effectively, all bets were off. Well, 2 months passed yesterday, so I don't think this is a surprise for anyone who's been watching developments unfold closely in the region.
As a former ambassador, of course, representing Australia and knowing this region very well, we've seen some retaliation now from Iran in the form of this drone attack at this stage. And, of course, this is an unfolding story. It seems that the IDF has not reported any casualties as a result of this. But, as I say, it's early days. Do you expect Iran to retaliate even further than this drone attack?
I do. I'd say with the drones, look, firstly, they'll take 7 or 8 hours to reach Israeli airspace, so we wouldn't expect to see any impact from them until late this evening, Australian time. But they also have, Iran has a significant, ballistic missile arsenal, as well as its own aircraft and whatnot. So they have certainly publicly said they will be retaliating. I would point out, though, that according to media reports here, a significant part of Iran's senior military leadership has been killed or incapacitated, which will potentially pose challenges for them exercising command and control over their military forces.
Yeah, that is very significant. Look, originally, and this seems to be shifting, but originally Iran's foreign ministry had said that the US, as Israel's main supporter, will be responsible for the consequences of what was described as Israel's adventurism. How vulnerable is the US? You mentioned personnel being moved out of the region because clearly Donald Trump did have an indication that this was coming. But this really puts the US in some sort of vulnerability too, doesn't it?
It does, and I think the United States is very mindful of that. We saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio's statement warning Iran quite clearly not to target US military personnel or installations in their response to this attack. But US forces will be on high alert, and really it will be Iran's choice. Do they contain their response to Israel, or do they seek to target the United States, Israel's ally, or do they seek to target third countries such as the Gulf states in the neighbourhood?
Is there a real risk of a wider regional war now?
Look, there is. I would just say, though, that we've been in a sort of regional conflict now really since the 7th of October 2023, Hamas terrorist attacks, which quickly spread to the Houthis in Yemen, to Hezbollah, had an element in Syria as well, and a number of strikes between Israel and Iran. So certainly the temperature of that conflict, or the tempo, has increased as a result of this latest attack. But it's against a backdrop of a very high degree of tension in the region already.
And of course, we've heard from world leaders this afternoon. We're yet to hear from the Prime Minister. Penny Wong spoke earlier as it was unfolding. Now, the UK's Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has spoken too, urging both sides to de-escalate. Is that the right tone for countries like ours, the UK, to be taking?
Well, look, I certainly don't want to see, a further escalation in hostilities. But by the same token, what has driven this has been Iran's continued destabilisation of the region, its pursuit of a nuclear weapons program in violation of any number of Security Council resolutions, and, escaping the scrutiny of the Atomic Energy Agency's safeguards, support to armed terrorist groups in the region. So Iran has been a destabilising force in the region for some time, and it has been presented with a choice to seek that end that destabilisation activities, and has clearly chosen not to do so.
So do you think Israel's done the right thing here?
Well, look, I'm not going to give a moral characterisation of it, but Israel is acting in what it says is its own national interest to ensure the survival of the state of Israel. They've certainly acted preemptively in the past, whether it was to destroy a nuclear reactor in Iraq in 1981, a nascent nuclear facility in Syria in the early 2000s. And because of Israel's history and the history of enmity and hostility by its neighbours towards it, Israel takes a very uncompromising view towards existential threats that are being levelled against it, and I can understand that.
My previous guest suggested, though, that as a result of the action, the world is less safe. Do you agree with that?
I don't necessarily agree with that, no. I mean, certainly we're entering a period of heightened danger and uncertainty. But by the same token, I mean, as I said, Iran has been making the world and the region less safe now for a couple of decades. Even, the Russia-Ukraine war, Russia gets most of, or many of, its drones and munitions from Iran. Iran continues to fuel conflict in that region. So I would like to see an Iran that is reconciled to accommodation with its neighbours, and that has only peaceful interests towards its neighbours. Now, how that comes about through diplomacy or other means, that remains to be seen.
Of course, this is all happening as our Prime Minister is travelling across the world, but ultimately to the G7, where he hopes to obtain a meeting with Donald Trump. I imagine Donald Trump, where, we were hoping to raise the issue around AUKUS and some other issues, will be rather distracted given what's happening in the Middle East.
Well, I think this will dominate discussions at the G7 meeting. It's not yet clear, I don't think, whether President Trump will actually attend that meeting. I think the US National Security Council is convening at 11 o'clock on Friday, Washington time, which is sort of very late this evening, our time. But clearly this will be the main focus of discussion amongst G7 countries. It doesn't mean that the Prime Minister shouldn't seek to have a bilateral with the President, and he shouldn't seek to put our views on AUKUS and other important issues. But clearly we will also be asked, and the Prime Minister will also be asked, for our views and our concerns around this latest development.
It does pretty dramatically alter the G7 agenda and the kind of discussions, though, doesn't it now, given this is unfolding?
Oh, absolutely. It will dominate the G7 agenda, and I think it will take over anything else that was meant to be being discussed at that time, because effectively this is a potentially a crisis situation. I'd point out as well, I mean, we've seen a series of Israeli airstrikes against Iran, but all the indications are that this will not be a standalone attack. This is part of a wave of military action designed to basically degrade or disable Iran's nuclear program and parts of its ballistic missile program and its nuclear expertise. And that is going to unfold over several days.
Yeah, it certainly is, and could take some time. Just finally, of course, we have people in the region as well. you have been an ambassador. What's the expectation around whether we evacuate our own citizens in this region now? I know you can't represent DFAT, you're in opposition, which you're probably not very happy about, but what is the kind of usual way that this now would unfold?
Well, firstly, we would seek to make sure that no Australians are travelling to the region, and I believe our travel advice has been upgraded to reflect that advice. We'd then be urging Australians to basically to heed the advice of local authorities in both Israel and Iran, and also elsewhere throughout the region, which might come into some danger. I think, though, certainly contingency planning for potential evacuations would need to be commencing, but I think it's the situation is too fluid and too uncertain to begin that. So we would be advising Australians, I expect, and I think this is the case, to heed the advice of local authorities, make sure they are in a safe place close to bomb shelters if they're available, and to stay very closely informed about developments.
Dave Sharma, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.